What if China conquered the Philippines? Pros and cons explained. What would happen if China conquered the Philippines? It sounds like something out of history books or geopolitical fiction, but exploring this scenario helps us understand power, sovereignty, and the real stakes in Asia today. Let's break down the possible pros and cons if the China somehow took control of the Philippines. First, let's look at the possible advantages purely from a practical or economic perspective. One potential change would be massive infrastructure development. China is known for building large-scale projects quickly, both domestically and abroad. Under Chinese control, the Philippines could see rapid construction of railways, highways, bridges, ports, and power plants. These kinds of projects are often associated with China's global infrastructure strategy, the Belt and Road Initiative. This could modernize transportation and logistics across the islands, potentially boosting trade and mobility. Another possible outcome is industrialization. China might relocate factories to the Philippines due to lower labor costs and strategic location in Southeast Asia. That could create manufacturing hubs, export zones, and technology assembly plants. Employment might rise, and the country could become more industrialized rather than relying heavily on services and overseas remittances. There could also be stronger state capacity. China's governance system emphasizes centralized planning and fast implementation. Large projects often move quickly because decisions face fewer political obstacles. In theory, this could reduce bureaucratic delays that sometimes slow development projects in democratic systems. Integration into China's economic sphere could also bring increased trade, investment, and tourism from the Chinese mainland. The Philippines might become deeply connected to Chinese supply chains and markets. But now we need to look at the major downsides, and these are far more serious and likely. The biggest consequence would be the loss of sovereignty. The Philippines would no longer be an independent nation. Its constitution, elections, and democratic institutions would likely be replaced by governance under the Chinese Communist Party. Filipinos would lose the ability to choose their leaders and shape national policy. There could also be cultural and identity erosion. Over time, an occupying power often reshapes education, language use, and media narratives. Mandarin could be promoted over Filipino languages, and national history might be rewritten from a Chinese state perspective. Generations later, Filipino identity could weaken. Another likely outcome is resistance and conflict. History shows that conquered populations rarely accept foreign rule peacefully. Insurgencies, protests, and underground movements could emerge across the islands. In response, authorities might impose surveillance, military presence, and crackdowns. This cycle could lead to decades of instability and human rights concerns. Economic control is another risk. Key sectors such as ports, telecommunications, energy, and mining might be dominated by Chinese state-owned companies. While development might occur, profits and strategic control could flow outward rather than benefiting local communities. The Philippines could also become heavily militarized. Its geographic position in the South China Sea is strategically critical. China might build naval and air bases across the archipelago, turning the country into a forward military platform. This could make the islands a focal point in regional power conflicts. International consequences would also be severe. A conquest would likely trigger global sanctions and diplomatic backlash. Trade could collapse, foreign investment could flee, and tourism could fall sharply. Since the Philippine economy depends heavily on global connections and overseas workers, the economic shock could be massive. Civil liberties would likely shrink as well. China restricts political dissent, media freedom, and online speech. Those limits could extend into Philippine society, changing daily life, journalism, and public expression. So when we compare the potential benefits and costs, the pattern becomes clear. There might be infrastructure growth and industrial investment in the short term, but the long-term consequences would likely include loss of freedom, national identity, and self-determination. In reality, full conquest in today's world is extremely unlikely and enormously costly. It would risk major regional conflict and global economic fallout. Still, exploring this scenario highlights something important. National independence is not just about territory. It's about culture, rights, and the power to decide a country's own future. If you found this geopolitical deep dive interesting, consider subscribing for more global analysis and Philippine focused discussions.